So I'm going to introduce Silva Neves to you, who's from the Contemporary Institute of Clinical Sexology. And Silva, you're going to respond to the morning's papers, I understand. And the title of the talk is Contemporary Psychotherapy, Evolution in Our Modern Time. Over to you.
Hello, yes, thank you for inviting me. I'm not going to respond specifically to the articles because they have not been published yet, but also I've not been here this morning. So I'm very sorry that I'm actually just dropping in and I can't stay with you the whole day because I'm actually at another conference. So, but because I've read the articles, I have a bit of a sense of what this conference is about, of course. And so I'm here to offer some of my thoughts about where psychotherapy is now and where it's going based on my experience, but also based on the articles that I've read that are yet to be published. I'm going to share my screen just to give you a bit of visuals. Okay. So just for everybody, my name is Silva. I'm a COSRT-accredited psychotherapist, psychosexual and relationship psychotherapist. I'm a clinical associate with Pink Therapy, and I'm also UKCP-registered. I'm a trauma psychotherapy, the clinical supervisor, and I currently work online. Used to work in London, and now work online. And I'm also an author. And so first, I just want to really talk about our modern world now. And I'm very much aware that meeting on Zoom and for me to be in another country, in another conference and taking part in this conference is actually part of our modern world. And in the last few years since the pandemic, we have seen how psychotherapy adapted to this modern world with being online. And at the beginning of 2020, I do remember quite a lot of debates about is in-person therapy better than online therapy, and what if it doesn't work, and all sorts of anxiety. But what we did find is that even though in-person therapy is different from online therapy, both are very, very effective and both are just as good. And actually, in fact, online therapy can offer some things that in-person therapy can't offer. Accessibility is a very big one. For example, there's many offices in London that have stairs with no lifts, and there are also places in terms of location. If you want to have access to a specialist, for example, a psychosexual specialist or trauma specialist, in my case, it's we kind of concentrated in big cities. And what if it's somebody in rural Wales or in the middle of the country in Scotland? Then what happens? And what I've realized, or certainly the feedback I got, is that therapists, specialist therapists, but psychotherapists in general, we became a lot more accessible. And we became also a little bit cheaper, because those of us that had to rent a very expensive consulting room, suddenly that overhead kind of disappeared, and we could offer better fees for clients too. So what we saw really recently is how psychotherapy, that was quite a traditional way of working in person, in an office, really adapted really well. And actually psychotherapy thrived because there has not been as so much demand as there is now for therapy. And therapists are more flexible, and clients are getting more help. So this is really amazing. And this is just one way that the psychotherapy evolved recently. And with that, of course, what we've seen in the last few years too is how world events have happened as well. Things like, for example, the murder of George Floyd, and all sorts of other kind of very important things that got us to think about and reflect on our biases, on our the way that we sometimes assume things, and really challenging ourselves. And certainly the psychotherapy field has been criticized and challenged very much in the last few years about being really very much white, heterosexual, middle class, teaching and population. And what kind of falls away from this very specific population is kind of like misunderstood, very poor training, and not a lot of understanding about those kind of nuances. And so now that we know that psychotherapy can evolve so well and adapt so well to the modern world, the other issue about the modern world is that our population is changing, and our population is changing fast, and the need of our population is changing. But our texts and our literature is still lagging behind, with being still very much white, heterosexual, middle class. And so one of the things is to think about that. Of course, in the last few years, there's been more trainings on diversity, on white fragility, on thinking about how we can have an anti-oppressive practice, how we can have an anti-racist practice, how we can be a lot more LGBTQ friendly, how we can understand trans people a little bit more, and of course how we can be accessible to people with disabilities, and on and on and on. But diversity is often misunderstood as that. It's understood as other than the white heterosexual middle class. And actually, the fact is that diversity as a word is for everybody. It helps everybody, even the white heterosexual people. And the reason for that is because part of diversity is challenging all the myths of society that we have grown up with, that were racist myths and heteronormative myths and cisgenderist and misogynist and so on. So even with a heterosexual person, somebody identifying as being heterosexual, they will often come up with their own issues that is to do with heteronormativity, or sometimes mononormativity, the idea that monogamy is the gold standard. And so by really opening up the conversations about diversity, that all of us in some ways have intersectionalities and have diversity, means that we can help people, heterosexual people who battle against toxic masculinity ideas, for example, or battle against the norms. And there's plenty of heterosexual white people that do not conform to what that means in terms of that very strict kind of narrative of what it's got to be like. And so a lot of people can be white and heterosexual, but also they can be kinky, and they can also enjoy multiple relationships. And all of that is still very misunderstood. But of course, in terms of diversity, we also really focus on those populations that we have not really discussed, and also that we haven't really spoken to themselves. Sometimes we speak about them, but without them. And that's also another issue. So it's an exciting time in psychotherapy right now, because we are having those discussions, and this conference is basically one of those, which is fantastic. Now, of course, we have to look at the privilege of being of conforming to our society, and the privilege of conforming to our society is that sometimes there are some things that are really general blind spots, even for us therapists, even for well-trained therapists, because of that privilege. So one example I often give, and I usually get people being shocked by that, is when I say that in the world there are currently 69 countries that do not welcome LGBTQ people. You can actually be arrested in 69 countries of the world. And for a heterosexual person that has that privilege of being heterosexual, it doesn't even come to their mind. And so I spoke to a very experienced psychotherapist, a great friend of mine, who is heterosexual. And for them, they never actually considered that if they want to have their sunny winter holidays in Dubai, they can just click on the website and book without a thought about their safety. For people like me, if I want to go to a country, I have to check their laws, because there are many countries that I'm not welcome in. And that's one of the blind spots that heterosexual people have. Another one is the simple act of holding hands. Heterosexual people literally never have to think about holding their partner's hand. It doesn't even come into their mind about what it means. And of course, holding hands for a heterosexual couple is has a very different meaning from holding hand to a same-sex, in a same-sex couple. And sometimes it's not safe. And sometimes we'd rather not do it. But sometimes it means defiance, it means courage. For heterosexual people, it just means a mark of affection. But also, we have to look at the other side. feeling like you're identifying with being not white or not heterosexual or not cisgender, part of the minority groups, does not mean that automatically we know everything about the group that we belong to, because belonging is not the same as knowing. So I know my own lived-in experience as a cisgender gay man who is a foreigner in the UK, but I don't pretend that I know all the lives of gay men, and I don't pretend I know all the diversities and intersectionalities of LGBTQ plus populations, even though I have a sense of belonging to them. So what it means is that I still have to read the books, the queer theories, the books about queer therapy, the books about other diversities, because the clinical knowledge is different. And I think that's really sometimes a mistake that we make, that blind spots can also come from the side of belonging to a place. If we belong, we think we might know that other person that identifies the same as us, but we don't. And actually, also, if I have a supervisor that identifies the same as we do, then we can all share blind spots, and then that's not helpful. So I think it's very good. I mean, this is my practice anyway, that I have about 4 or 5 supervisors, and I've got 4 or 5 times the amount of required supervision. But for me, it's about really getting a broad lens. I just have supervisors from different backgrounds so that I can keep an open mind and to keep different windows to clients. So contemporary psychotherapy, if we think about that, if we think about this kind of evolving population, the changing population, it means that we have to have an ongoing learning. For all of us, we need to keep learning. Even now, you know, I would say that I'm really quite strong on the diversity language of LGBTQ, but actually those words that are deemed acceptable change year to year, and there might be a word that I'm using today that is acceptable that next year it won't be, because by next year there might have been new thinking about it, and people identifying with that specific group might actually say, actually this is not a word that I resonate with. So keeping a broad mind is important, but keeping learning is also important. And as well as keeping learning is to not be afraid of making mistakes, and to be able to ask, you know, what might be the right term these days. Ask with, you know, with of course trusted colleagues. So you know, how do we speak about people of diverse ethnicity and racial backgrounds? Well, you ask them, basically, and you know, even the language about this minority population changed from BAME to people of color, and now people prefer diverse ethnicity and racial identities, and others prefer other terms. And so we just really have to listen to, you know, we think of transgender people, then that is the term, that transgender people, but some people identify with another term that they prefer. So we have to keep a diverse language, and there's no right or wrong, but there's definitely something that we have to be in touch with the people and their own identities. But ongoing learning can produce shame, because when, especially in our profession in psychotherapy, our knowing directly has an impact on our clients. So we are trained that if we don't know, we can harm our clients. So we want to know. And if we also keep in mind that we don't know everything because we have to keep learning, we can feel shame about, oh my gosh, why don't I know that, and I should know that, and I don't know everything, and I don't know all the terms of LGBTQ, and I don't know all the terms of disability, and is it disability that we say, or is it something else? And what about, you know, Black people and religious diversity and all of that? What do we say? And we can feel really kind of quite scared about not knowing. And when shame comes up with, you know, when we stumble across a blind spot, what happens is that we, you know, the 4 ways of reacting to shame. One is that we attack ourselves. So we think, oh my gosh, I'm a terrible therapist, I should stop working. Or we attack the other person that is showing us our blind spot. It could be our supervisor, it could be a trainer, it could be an organization, an institute. Or we withdraw. So it means that we're thinking, oh, these are these other people that I don't work with them. So I just refer and I just not going to learn. Or we dismiss, and it's like, it's not, yeah, I know all about that, but it's not, I'm not really concerned with that. Okay, I don't need to learn. I know everything. All this diversity stuff is the woke stuff. It's not for me. So we tend to react like this, and I have seen certainly a mixed reactions as a trainer as well when we start to talk about diversity. But shame is something that really comes up in all of us when we do have a blind spot, and especially if it's a blind spot that once it's not blind anymore, we think, oh, that was so obvious. And so we have to live with shame, and we have to manage it. And that's part of being a contemporary psychotherapy, in my opinion. It's to embrace the ongoing learning, but also to be compassionate to ourselves, to not be in this binary of, I know and I'm a good therapist, or I don't know and I'm a bad therapist. What about we know enough, and so we are good therapists, and at the same time we need to learn more because the population is always changing. And with that, surfing our feeling of shame, surfing it, and we can seek support from peers with that. We can talk to our supervisors, hopefully we trust them, talk to our supervisors about it, talk to some trusted colleagues, so we can soothe our shame and manage it. And when I just dropped in today, there was just a conversation about seeing and not seeing. So I'm really kind of quite glad that I've got a slide about it. And so, and also the perceiving and the relating that one of the participants was talking about. And I think that's very important, because in psychotherapy, when we say we see or we don't see, we really talk about the seeing with the eyes, but also the perceiving and the relating inside, the multiple ways that we can see our clients, that not just with the actual eyes, but also the things that we don't see. If we are not aware of diversity, we might not even be aware that we don't see those things. So as an example, if you're working with a couple and it's your first session and one is a man and the other one is a woman and they sit on your sofa, are you assuming that they are heterosexual because they look heterosexual? But that couple could be bisexual. And if you don't see, or if you don't take a moment to think about what you don't see compared to what you see, if you actually go with your perception, your first perception, oh, well, it's a man and a woman, so they must be heterosexual, let's go with that, without actually asking the question or having some part of your formulation that could include those things that you don't see, those things that you don't perceive. When you ask a question, it's a very simple question. I don't want to assume, so I'd like to ask about your sexual orientation. Then suddenly there is a deeper level of relating with your clients, because then your clients will have the information. This person knows, this person doesn't make an assumption, and therefore this person is safe. And right now I'm in a conference, in a sexology conference, and certainly what we have been talking about is the lack of education around talking about sex and talking about sexual orientation and talking about the erotic means that therapists don't then ask those questions. And if you don't ask the questions, the clients won't tell you about those very private parts of their lives if you don't ask the questions first. They keep it to themselves. And that's certainly in my profession, that's what I see all the time. I see clients saying, yeah, my last therapist was great, I love it, but we never talked about sex. So I'm coming to you now for the sex bit. And I think that all therapists should be able to talk about their clients' sex lives. It's such an important part of our lives. So, so what I would like to invite you today, really, when you think of diversity, is really to think about, to have this thing at the back of your mind, to think, what is it that I don't see? What is it that I don't perceive? What do I formulate about my clients? Do I formulate things based on assumptions that are based on particular scripts or particular textbooks that I have? But what about the rest? What about the rest? Another important one about the perceiving and the relating is how in psychotherapy, we often have.
You're pretty much at time, Silva. So
Sorry. So I'm gonna speed up.
okay.
The other thing was about the sense of individualistic self compared to the communal self, and that depends on whether we are Western philosophy or Asian philosophy. So I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to speed up. There was something about self-disclosure that was thorny, but I think you talked about that earlier, so I'm going to stop here. And I just really want to say that as part of diversity, really what we do is about helping people get to know themselves as who they are as humans. And we have to do that for ourselves. We have to know about our own intersectionalities. We have to know about our blind spots, our discomfort, our shame. And then we can help others also feel a bit more human and not just boxed up labels. So that's it for me. If you want ask me questions, these are my details.
So thank you very much for that. So we've got a little bit more time now for questions and comments and thoughts. So over to all of you.
Well, just to say thank you very much for the presentation. There are lots of really interesting things there, and I suppose I'm struggling to sort of think of there's a couple of things, but one of them is I wondered when you were talking about well, stupid to say you're talking about diversity. Of course you were. I was thinking about the idea that we might be a bit too restricted in how we think about ourselves, and I was thinking that I wonder to what extent. I mean, maybe that's what you just said, that the idea that we, you know, that we have a self, we are an ego, we are one thing, gets in the way too of thinking about diversity, because, you know, we think we're one, even though we're probably very different, you know, from one day to the next, or from 1 month to the next.
Absolutely, yes. All of us have multiple intersections in terms of identities, but we also react to the world very differently from one day to another, depending on how we feel about ourselves, what we are exposed to that day in terms of our experiences, and the stories we make about that. So one day, if you are starting the day watching the news and all you see is war and economic crisis and terrible stuff, that day you might just be a lot more sensitive about your own sense of self and your own sense of safety compared to another day when you might not be watching the news. That's just kind of like an easy example.
Silva, I was interested that you said something about, and I wasn't clear, because you said, well, you cut that bit. So I thought, oh no, I wasn't sure whether it was it again, Western and Eastern?
Yes,
yeah,
that's right. Yes, Eastern. I think Asian, but it was Eastern. That's what I meant. Yes, Western and Eastern philosophy, and that's, you know, I got challenged with that with one of my clients who was from an Eastern country, who was actually saying to me, you know, you're talking to me like myself is just that one person that is separate from everything else, but actually talking about my place in the family and talking about my needs. Not being first, but the needs of my positioning in the family coming as a priority as part of my well-being is really the thing I want you to hear. And I was like, oh, okay, well, thanks for the challenge. I need to really, I need to kind of reframe what I've learned in my Western books and change. And I think, you know, as psychotherapists, we have to be communicating to our clients that they can challenge us. We're not the ones, we are not the all-knowing people, that we can get it wrong. And if we get it wrong, they need to tell us so that we can change.
That's quite complex, actually, isn't it?
Yes.
Because some people might see it sometimes as a defense or resistance, all kinds of things, isn't it? And they may be right and they may be wrong.
That's right. But really listening to the clients is important. And sometimes I think that we could be too keen, depending on our modalities, we could be too keen to offer interpretations that are based on very narrow ways of thinking about what we're learning in our Western society, also in outdated books. And when we offer those interpretations, we actually might just be labeling our clients one thing or another, rather than actually being with them. And I think that's an important consideration to take sometimes. You know, when you formulate an idea or a hypothesis about our client states, we have to actually really also be humble enough to keep the consideration that we could be completely wrong.
It's also, isn't it, it's that sometimes our comments, interpretations come from a notion of difference, isn't it? And so different from me, which, you know, that's the yardstick or meter rule, whatever. Yeah.
That's right.
But that I suppose it must be true from wherever one's coming from.
Right. So I think it's, you know, when we come up to a challenge, that's really when we need to speak to each other. And one thing as well I've noticed in psychotherapy trainings and in books is that we tend to really talk about the successful therapy and all the things that work so well, but we're not so good at hearing our mistakes and hearing the things that we do wrong and what we've learned from the mistakes. And I think that's something that we need to normalize a little bit more in our profession, to actually say, no, actually, I worked with this person that has a completely different identity from me, and I made some assumptions based on what I knew, and I imposed some of my values onto that client, and actually that was that caused damage in that client in that particular session, and we had to repair it. How often do we hear those conversations? You know, we don't often amongst us, and I think we need to maybe talk a bit more about that.
Yes, it's difficult, isn't it? Because I think if somebody starts to, they can take it from the whole group, can't they? And they can be discriminated against as the one who got it wrong.
Right, and that's why we have, and that's part of the shame reaction as well. And so I think we need to be a lot kinder to our, you know, with each other and to ourselves, and to not compete with each other, but to lift each other up.
It may be. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. It may be. Thank you for your presentation, all your presentations. It may be naive of me, but I was wondering, when we talk about diversity and evolution of psychotherapy, are we also talking about the evolution of us as therapists and trying to in some way evolve human beings or our peers, you know, so that we're not saying to the white people, white heterosexual middle class people are bad. We're saying, hey, wouldn't it be great if we could all be treated the same? And if that's what we're asking, I wonder what would have to be sacrificed and what would have to be worked upon to try and get us closer to that.
Yes, I think we have to be kind to ourselves, and for us to keep evolving our process, because as long as we live, we develop as well. And I think that you are right, that we have to say, look, we are all the same, we're all human, but also we're different. So we have to look at the same, and we also have to look at the differences and to acknowledge the difference. And so, but still as part of being human and being equal in that way. And so, you know, we just have to speak to each other about that, because we might all have different experiences and different opinions about what it's like to work with others. And evolving psychotherapy, evolving ourselves in that contemporary stance is very much about that. It's very much about us keeping challenging ourselves and keeping learning and being aware of seeing and relating to the difference and to the similarities.
There's also a huge problem. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not. Oh, you can hear me.
Yes.
There's a huge problem here, isn't there, with language? You know, I was just thinking, I understood, Jessica, I think, kind of what you were saying. But on the other hand, a language of the same is in itself problematic. You know, the same as what? As who? Do we all get reduced to some sort of, you know, I don't know, hetero mass group? I don't know the right words even for it. So it's just difficult. Every time we speak, we kind of upset somebody, really.
Yes, but when we come to that, is about how we can have those conversations without attacking each other.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And so also in terms of the same, you said same to what? You know, the other issue, something that we need to talk about is this idea of majority versus minority, and who gets to decide what makes a majority and what makes a minority. And certainly in sexology, in my area, you know, the majority that we might perceive as majority could be monogamous and it could be heterosexual. But what we see in sexology is that there's so much diversity that there's not really any normal and any kind of majority in any kind of sense. But also with more of our knowledge about, you know, different practices, especially for young people, right? If we work with young people, they have a better language or more diverse language of pansexuality and non-monogamy and all of that stuff. But we also need to not do the reverse kind of judgment to say, well, the people that are pansexual, they are the cool people, and the monogamous people are the boring people, or the kinky people are the fun people, and the vanilla people are the boring people, because then that's problematic as well. So diversity is about still keeping and say, you know what, monogamy and vanilla is just as equal and as validated as those that are kinky and in multiple relationships. It doesn't mean that being kinky is a result of sexual abuse, and it doesn't mean that being vanilla is being loving and full of intimacy.
I think I was zoning in on your comments about with heterosexuality in certain countries, that if you want to travel, or people within the LGBTQ community want to travel, they have to check the laws of that country. I was thinking, if you're a Black person, you might see it as a white space in certain countries anyway, and it's not the laws that you're checking for. You're checking because it may not be so visible that you're not welcome, and that might actually make it harder. And it just took me quite circular, because maybe the same is being treated the same as if you want to hold hands with your partner, that you can hold hands with your partner, whatever sexuality, whatever race you are, in whatever country you are. If it's acceptable for that group to do it, then why isn't it acceptable for another? I think that's where I was going with the same, but I do appreciate it's a very complex scenario.
Yeah, and I think the feeling or the affect of oppression, whatever it is, whether it's homophobia, transphobia, racism, misogyny, can actually feel the same, but the actual nature or the content of the oppression can be different. So, you know, one of my colleagues who is Black often says, when I go to a training, a psychotherapy training, I often expect to be the only Black person, and I pop. That was her language. And so, and that's something that I don't experience, but it's something that is, you know, an anxiety for my colleague. So for me, my anxiety of oppression is different, but still feeling, you know, the same in terms of its effect.
Yeah. And I think
I'm afraid we need to come to an end. Sorry, Jessica, we really don't have time because we're shortening the lunch break. But I'm sure we'll have time to discuss some of this a bit more at the end of the day. So if you could hold on to it till then. So thank you very much. It seems to have provoked quite a lot of lively thought, and time to break for lunch. Della, you wanting to come in, say something?
Yes, I am. Thank you. Thanks.
I can tell.
Good. Thank you for that. Well, thank you very much, Silva, for that. I mean, I suppose, you know, we're still sort of opening things up, but it's not that anything goes. So it's we've got stuff to look at. Now, with regard to the program,